Hi, this is Jeffrey Shaw, and I'm excited to talk to Derek Champagne about my entrepreneurial journey and what led me to realize that every market has a secret language, which I teach in my book, LINGO.
Welcome to the Business Leadership Series, where we engage with leaders who are making an impact on their worlds and who want to share their knowledge and experience for your personal and professional growth. The following interview is designed to inspire you to become the best leader you can be. Your host, Derek Champagne, is the founder and CEO of The Artist Evolution, a full-service agency building successful brands, marketing tools, and campaigns, and also the author of the best-selling book, Don't Buy a Duck. And now, let's begin today's Leadership Series interview.
Welcome to the Business Leadership Series, where our goal is to inspire you to become the best leader that you can be. I'm excited about our guest today. He's going to talk to us about your customer's secret language. He's going to share his entrepreneurial journey, and that's Jeffrey Shaw. He's known as the LINGO guy. We'll ask him about that. And he's been the go-to portrait photographer for an exclusive clientele for over 30 years. You've seen his work on shows like The Oprah Show, CBS News, in O Magazine, People Magazine, New York Family Magazine, and his book LINGO, Discover Your Ideal Customer's Secret Language and Make Your Business Irresistible, helps business owners grow and entrepreneurs grow and understand their ideal customers on a deeper level, which increases engagement and their profits. Jeffrey, it's an honor to have you with us today.
Well, Derek, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
You bet. We'd like to start by hearing about some of your background. Many of our listeners are entrepreneurs, many are not, but we love to learn from our guests about what happened in their past to get them to where they are today. So if you don't mind, take us on a little bit of your journey, and then we'll talk some more about LINGO and some of the other topics that I really wanted to discuss with you today.
Awesome. Well, my journey, like a lot of entrepreneurs, has been a windy one, and certainly not a straight line, but in a long one. I've been, actually, I have to say I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. Everything from selling eggs door to door to selling Christmas cards door to door. We're talking like when I was 14 and 15 years old. Went off to photography school, which I completed that program by the age of 20, and went immediately into portrait photography as a profession. Floundered for the first 3 years, struggling to get a business off the ground, and realized I was, in fact, that was a turning point moment for me to realize I was speaking the wrong language to the wrong people, which led me to completely reinvent my business as a portrait photographer and cater to a luxury market. And flew along just terrific doing that. Loved the work, built a family and a wonderful life on that, and just got a bug in me about 8 years ago where, people were coming to me for help and support because I was known to be successful in this field of photography. And I started coaching people, but I wanted to make it legitimate. So I went to coach training and got all the training. And I've never stopped receiving training, let's put it that way, as a coach and as a leader, because it's a constant educational process as one wants to get better at what they do and being able to support others. And, eventually you find yourself on stages speaking. I started my podcast, Creative Warriors, 3.5 years ago, actually more as a personal challenge. I didn't quite get the strategy of it all and how it can really elevate your presence. To me, it was just a personal challenge. Like, what would happen if I had my own podcast? And that led me to finally, again, by a very roundabout way, this is actually my third book that I've written, but the first one to get published.
Wow, congratulations.
I shelved the other two for one reason or another. And this came out through a very casual conversation with who turned out to be my editor. Was not an editor for me at the time. It was somebody I was at a gathering with. And in a casual conversation, I told her this crazy story that I encountered at 23 years old, which was a turning point moment for me as an entrepreneur. And I shared that story with her, and she goes, "That's your book." And I realized that the book I needed to write, LINGO, is actually a culmination of very unique marketing strategies that I've been using and applying for 30 years. And I think the world is ready and needs to hear what I have to say about this idea of LINGO.
Absolutely. I love it. A couple things stand out to me. I love that I can relate to your story and many of our listeners can, and many of our guests have, where you're a lifelong entrepreneur and you can look back to those early days of selling eggs or cards or washing windows or whatever it was that you were doing door to door. And then also I can relate to being a few years in business and things just not quite clicking. And as entrepreneurs, to be successful, you have to find ways to pivot and to learn, or you don't survive. And many businesses don't, but you are one of those who's not only thrived, but you've not only succeeded, but you've thrived and now are helping others. So thank you for doing that. And I'm glad that you are. I was able to read some of the excerpts, and I love the story behind LINGO and your experience at 23 years old. So I want to jump right into some questions that we have for you. Can you talk to me about how you discovered that every market has a secret language?
Yeah, and it is a crazy story. It's actually this story that caught this editor's attention and encouraged me to write this book, because it is crazy. I mean, it's a combination of events, but let's put it this way. I was failing as a photographer. And the crazy thing, Derek, is I was back in my hometown, right? So you would think if you understood anything, you would understand where you came from.
Right.
But boy, was I wrong. And, so I was struggling to launch this photography business at 20 years old at the time in my hometown. And so couple turning point moments here. The first turning point moment was when I had a woman come into my studio who I was trying to make all my strongest points about, the importance of having family photographs and handing them down from generation to generation, all the things I believed in so wholeheartedly as a photographer and what I was passionate about. And she looks at me and says, "That sounds great and all, but I'm worrying about how I'm going to pay my rent. I don't have the luxury of worrying about my children's memories." And I realized in that moment, I literally, and I tell the story in the book, I actually walked, after I finished meeting with her, it wasn't going anywhere. I walked into what was my camera room, which was a dark room. I backed myself up against the wall, slid down the wall, and just sobbed. I was 23 years old. The pain of that, because I realized, oh my gosh, I made a huge mistake.
Right.
Like, this was not, I wasn't aligned with the people here. Like, my values were so strong around the idea of having photographs to hand down from generation to generation. You can't sell that to people who don't know if they can put a meal on their table. Right. And I realized I had made a fundamental mistake, Derek, that I bet people make every single day. I think 95% of businesses are built backwards, right? People build the businesses they want, but they don't know who they're building it for. So that put me on a quest of who is my ideal customer, who gets me, like who values what I value. Because I realize you can't really sell, not in integrity. You can't sell something to someone if they don't value it. Right. And she actually gave me the answer because she had specifically used the word luxury. She said she didn't have the luxury. And I was like, well, then who does? People that can afford luxury. Now, I'm a lower middle class kid growing up in this tiny little farm town and a couple hours north of New York City, about 2 hours north of New York City, which at that time was a small town. Right. And so I made a trek into New York City and with a sole goal of understanding what the perspective was from the affluent market's perspective. Like, how does the world, if you don't know it, how do you learn it? Right. So I went to the only really expensive store that I knew of in New York City. It was Bergdorf Goodman. Smack on Fifth Avenue in New York City. I can't even imagine how many tens of thousands of people walk by it every day and have no idea it's there. Wow. Because it's not for everybody, and that's the point. Like, this was a store that had a very, they knew their business. So, and I don't even know how I knew about it, to be honest with you. I have a feeling it showed up in a movie or something. I honestly do, because I'm like, I have no idea for where I came from. How would I even know the store was there? But I went there. And long story short, although it is a very long story, ultimately I bought a candle. I had $20 in a store where the parking, cost more than that. Right. But I had $20 in my hand to be able to spend. And I found a candle, this tiny little votive candle. And I asked for it to be gift wrapped because I wanted to understand the whole process. And what I did know and what I already picked up on is that how things were portrayed made a very strong impression. So I wanted to know, how do things get packaged in a way that they look valuable? And so at this gift wrap department, which I recently was at, and I go back to Bergdorf Goodman all the time, and I frequently have had my picture taken at this gift wrap department because it means the world to me. So, but at that time, 23 years old, I asked the woman behind the counter. I said, I'm trying to learn here, and I wonder if you would show me how to wrap this so that it looks really nice and pretty and valuable. And she actually invited me into the back room, and proceeded to show me how to wrap this candle. Now, there was a crazy turning point moment where she's wrapping this candle in a lot of tissue paper, like tons of tissue paper, which is I already was confused. I'm like, why so much tissue paper for this little candle? But then, Derek, with the most drama, like I actually would love to act this out on stage someday, which I will on a keynote, because with the most drama, she stops and she looks up at me and she says, "Don't use any tape." Now, it was so ridiculously over dramatic. I was like, why? Like, why don't you use any tape? And then meanwhile, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, in my family, we wrap our Christmas presents with duct tape. Like, how do you not use tape, right? and newspapers and duct tape. There you go, Christmas wrapping. And she said, well, she went on to explain, no, you don't use any tape because the candle all wrapped in tissue paper goes inside of a box. The box has a top on it, and the whole thing is tied with ribbon. So when I give this to my customer who's going to give it as a gift, they're going to untie the ribbon, take the box top off, unfold all the tissue, make sure the candle is in perfect order, put it all back together, retie the ribbon, and nobody knows it was opened. Now, that was a light bulb moment for me. And that is actually, in my mind, I coined the term secret language, because I felt like I had just learned a secret that you would never know unless you were serving that clientele. Right. And it's like this major cue. And I realized, what else is going on in the world that I don't understand?
Yeah, absolutely love that. I love that you're looking at, in my book, Don't Buy a Duck, I talk about the 5 crisis points in marketing after reviewing over 1,000 brands over the past decade. And one of the segments of that is around the brand's Bermuda Triangle. And part of that is not understanding who your target customer is and then not knowing how to communicate with them. But you go into it in so much deeper detail. So I'm going to recommend to our listeners, of course, look at my book, but you got to look at this book, Lingo. It's great. I'm reading it in detail. I want my agency members to read it in detail. I think it's a great fit. And I love that it's a great lesson. I love the example. You realized that when you broke down in tears, that what you offered was not relevant to the person you were reaching out to, and you had the wrong customer in there. And then we didn't have the packaging correct. And so I love that you went out and sought that. And if you don't go into your customer's world, you're not going to learn that. And that's what you had to do.
Yeah, and that was actually when in Lingo, I lay out a 5-step strategy. Like, I tried making this as linear as possible, although, like I said, you're talking about 30 years of experience. So I laid this out in a 5-step strategy. And the first step is perspective. Like, you have to understand the perspective of the people you want to serve. And in your own area of expertise, you know that most people get that wrong. And there's mixed messages on that. I think in marketing, a lot of people talk about they are their customer. I was like, no, you probably aren't. You probably were your ideal customer. There's probably a part of your story that's wrapped into the story of your ideal customer, but chances are you evolved out of it, which is why you want to serve that ideal customer. So it's important to, I think almost all of us have to transition into someone else's perspective. One of the examples I offer in the book is how much technology, like an app, how many apps have been developed by people that either had a problem in the world or there was something they wanted to solve, or, Facebook even, right? I want a better dating site in college. And it's after that college experience that they develop the app, right? So they've actually evolved out of the immediate need, but still have an audience to serve. That obviously is huge. But that's the importance of going back and understanding the perspective of your ideal customer. In my case, it was really extreme because I was a lower middle class kid wanting to understand the affluent. But I think it's the fact it was so extreme that really helped me get it so that I can help others. But even if you're building a business that's catering to teenagers, catering to a different age demographic, different gender, somebody who's at a different stage in life, there's always a perspective for you to gain, for you to truly understand how the world looks from your ideal customer's perspective.
I love that. And an example we had the CTO of Career Builder on our podcast, and he said at some development meetings, they will not have the meeting unless there's existing customers in the chairs in that room, because they need it to be relevant. I do too. And it's not appropriate for every meeting, but they did one time they weren't there, and when the heads of development said, why is that chair empty? We can't do this meeting. And I love that because he knew that they were going to backtrack and maybe not be relevant if they didn't. I love the duct tape example and the tape example, and my challenge, my conviction, I know you're going to keep going through this for us, but I'm always self-reflecting as well, is saying what what are we doing with our customers or with our target customers where we might be using duct tape or tape at all when that's not appropriate. And so we need to go back and reflect on our practices and see how relevant we're being. Hey, I'd love to hear from you about the 7 ways that lingo as a marketing strategy makes price and competition less or almost or not relevant at all.
Yeah. So who knows? We'll get through all 7 ways. But what I think is important is to understand how price can make competition irrelevant. There's a bond. I'm fascinated by brand loyalty. I was actually in a grocery store recently, and the guy at a couple registers down from me, bald head, had the Harley Davidson logo tattooed on his head.
Wow.
And I thought, but this is something Harley has done so well, right? They talk about speaking the secret language of their ideal customer. Like they so get their ideal customer, which I think, here's the thing, Derek, I think is so fascinating. Most of us, if we're not really into Harley Davidson, I think a lot of us think their ideal customer is different than who it actually is. Right. I think a lot of us, if you're not in the Harley Davidson community, I think a lot of people think of it as a Hell's Angel type of ideal customer. They're not.
Right.
They're 40 and 50-year-old, very wealthy Wall Streeters who, ride their hog on the weekends.
Right.
It's actually because these are not inexpensive bikes. Right. So huge brand loss. So I've always been fascinated by that. Like, what causes someone to have such deep devotion to a brand, in this case, extreme, that you had tattooed on your head? And, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, we get hung up on price. We get hung up thinking that, if we charge too much, it's going to repel our customers. And when actually, my feeling is when you understand the perspective of your ideal customer so well, that pricing it is so important to actually attract them, to not repel them, because pricing creates perception. And I'll bet everyone listening knows that there's been a time they have not bought something because it wasn't expensive enough.
Right.
Right? Because your perception, if it's not priced high enough, your perception is it must not be good. And whether it's a product or people do this on services, people in service-oriented businesses often don't charge enough for their services. Not only are they hurting themselves, it's not attractive to their ideal customer, right? So the bond, like the brand loyalty of this bald guy with a Harley, that bond supersedes price. Another example I offer in the book is if you can identify a hobby, be it, bicycling or, might be handbags, or a lot of us have a hobby that we're so passionate about that it's a part of our life that we spend a disproportionate amount of money on. Right? There's parts in your life you'll scale back, you won't pay as much. But man, if you're passionate about something, you will pay, especially it can be a brand. I know I interviewed a woman for our book, Tamsin Webster. And in my book, I talk about Tamsin's devotion to Diane von Furstenberg designs. Like, this is something she's passionate about, like everything she wears. And she's a speaker and a consultant. She does amazing work, but she's very often on stage. And when she and I really dug underneath her devotion to that brand, the thing she said, which I think was as much of a wake up moment for her as it was, for me hearing it, is that the brand, what people would say about the Diane von Furstenberg brand is exactly what she wants people to say about her brand, is that it's smart, well designed, and but easy to deal with, if you will.
Right.
Like kind of on the go. And it's so that in that case, her devotion to that brand is because it's speaking on her behalf. Right. So when you create a bond, which is the whole idea of lingo, the whole idea, the concept of speaking someone's secret language, the interesting thing is that actually what you're creating is an energetic, unspoken relationship where the bond is so tight that it supersedes the price. Right? People are like, I'm willing to pay, more than average, more than I would for many other categories in my life, because my sense is that you really get me, and people are willing to pay for that.
Right. Yeah, I love that, and I love hearing the Harley Davidson example. We did a pitch for them, and we identified that there was these weekend warriors, like the target that you're talking about, and then there's these super consumers that you would not even realize that they would be have an affinity for the brand when you're looking from the outside, but that's very perceptive. I love that. Any other ways that Lingo is a marketing strategy?
Well, one of the I think one of the more powerful things about when getting to the essence of speaking someone's secret language is actually I refer to as the second step in the book, is to create an atmosphere of familiarity. I think we don't realize how much of a hook familiarity is. And it's really a hook in two ways. One is familiarity creates comfort, right? Always, if you think about comfort food, why is comfort food what it is? Well, it's because it's the same Thanksgiving dinner every year. Like there's a comfort to that. And I even talk about in the book, I share a story about one year when I decided to change up the biscuits. My family was used to the biscuits that came in the tube. You smacked it on the counter and they exploded, and and that's what my family was used to. And I decided to, make my family a little more sophisticated. So I decided to make these biscuits from scratch, and everybody had a fit. It didn't matter whether they're good. Everybody had fits. Like, how dare you change up the biscuits?
Right.
And I realized, man, there's such a power to familiarity because it creates comfort. So the more you understand the perspective of your ideal customer, the more you can do things in your business practices, in your marketing, in your website, your branding, the more you can do things that are familiar to the way they already are in the world, which immediately makes them feel like they're in the right place. And then I'll add, Derek, just a second part of that. Because as I mentioned, there's two strong components to familiarity. One is the comfort factor. The second is that it stands out. And this is crazy to me. Like there's a kind of a psychological premise that I think is underneath this, which is you can only recognize what you know, right? The moment, Jerry, the moment you know about something, it seems like you see it everywhere. Right. It stands out, and you can't ignore it. If you travel to Europe, you can't unsee a Starbucks logo. Right. Like it's just, you can't not see it. And I tell them a story in a book about how I met a guy in an airplane because he was reading a book that I had just found out about. Right. So I sparked up a whole conversation. So familiarity both creates comfort and it stands out. That which we're familiar with stands out above everything else. And it's a great way to create branding that stands out above your competition.
Love it. Hey, I want to hear more from you about customer service. I want to hear more about your take on the customer service experience in our current market and why we may be able to improve with what we're currently doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, I guess you could say I have two opinions on customer service. One is that customer service, what I focus on in the book is talking about building a business that's customer centric, which is very different than customer service. Right. Customer centric, I define it as building a business where you're putting your ideal customer at the center and you're building a business for them. Right. Customer service, as wonderful as it is, I think can also imply we're constantly trying to bend over backwards for people that may not be our ideal customers. Right. We're held to a very high standard of customer service. I'm like, customer service should come with a great deal of ease because when you're working with your ideal customer, you're so connected with them that it's not like you're not serving them. You're just doing your thing.
Right.
So that's one side. The other side about this idea of experience is, I've got 3 millennials. And I'm fascinated by the millennial generation and seeing how they experience the world differently. And I think this is a shift that a lot of us in business are going to have to make, like customer service. A lot of us have decided in business the experience we want people to have. And there's been a lot of talk for years about people buying their experience. People are paying for the experience. And as soon as that conversation started, businesses started stepping up and saying, well, I'm going to create an amazing experience for my customers. Now we have to step back, and that got us to where we are. But now we need to step back and say, well, is it the experience the customers want? And I think a big shift in business nowadays is people want to create their own experiences. I think it's partly due to the proliferation of social media that people, Instagram users, look at Instagram stories, Facebook Live. People want to create their own experience. They might be at a concert, but they're creating the experience they want to have and the experience they want to share with their friends by streaming it. And I think we need to rethink the idea of experience, like everything else in business, that it's not the experience. I compare it to marketing. Like in my business, we don't even use the term marketing. We use the term enrolling because marketing is an old mentality to me. Marketing implies that you're going to come at people. You're going to market to people. Target markets, right? You're going to market to your target market. where enrolling has a weight of responsibility to it. To me, enrolling means, what do I have to do to inspire someone or compel someone to take one step at a time closer to me? Right? So I'm enrolling them towards me. So to me, similarly with experience, when you are creating the experience that you want your customers to have, in a way, it's a push out, as opposed to, what can I do in my business to allow the customers to create their own experience? I'll give you an example I give in the book. Is one of my favorite companies is mancrates.com.
Yeah. Okay.
And what I love about them is the fact that they're not hugely popular, right? I mean, they clearly do well, but it's not like talking about a Zappos or an Apple, right? I get to talk about mancrates.com. And I buy a number. Mancrates.com are gifts for men that, when the original concept of the company is the gifts for men, which would have a crate, would have a theme to it, but it would be a wooden crate. They now have like ammunition boxes and other things, but it used to just be the wooden vessel, which I'm still a purist. I like the wooden crate. Well, for $10 more, you can have the wooden. Now, the wooden crate comes with a crowbar.
Right.
Okay. So you're already letting your customer make their own experience, right? So you get this wooden crate, you get a crowbar, and I buy one of these for my son often and my nephews, and I like to pay the extra $10, and they will wrap the crate in duct tape. Back to the duct tape, right? Back to my roots. But for $10 more, they wrap it in. And now you talk about allowing your customers to have an experience. This is a 45 on Christmas morning, or whenever I give one of these gifts to my son, this is a 45-minute experience to get through that duct tape and then pry open the crate to see that, the crate's like full of beef jerky or something.
Right. But it's more about opening it, isn't it?
Exactly. What's inside is irrelevant, because as a business, they do a masterful job at giving us the tools to create our own amazing experience. And I think more of us need to think that creatively.
I love that. We actually sent one to a client last month or a couple months ago for his birthday, and he actually called us and said, I've got this crate here in my house and this crowbar. Do I open it now? What am I supposed to He loved it. It was
it's the best.
We sent chocolates and some other gift baskets to some other clients and didn't hear anything. But we get a call from this guy about the crate and the crowbar. So great concept. I love that. Hey, I want to hear we've got time for a few more questions. I'd love to hear your take on the 80-20 rule.
Yeah. The core intention of the entire book, Lingo, is what I think is the answer to the quickest road to a profitable business, and that is to only work with your ideal customers. So, I talk about busting up the Pareto principle in the book. Now, I don't want to ignore the brilliance of the Pareto principle, and that it does exist. The Pareto principle being the 80-20 rule, that 80% of your income comes from 20% of your customers. But, for who I coach and who I work with and who I wrote this book for, I'm out to protect the entrepreneurs, those businesses, probably 5 or fewer people. And, we don't have time. And Derek, we don't have time to waste. We don't have the 80-20 rule is essentially saying 8 out of 10 customers are a waste of our time.
Right.
But two will pay off, but 8 are a waste. Now, we don't have that kind of time. Not only do we not have the time, it is so hard to get someone's attention. That, how do you stand out if you're only going to appeal to 2 out of 10 people? So my sole goal of Lingo is to help entrepreneurs build a business speaking the secret language of their ideal customer. So you have to, 1, define who your ideal customer is, walk through the 5-step strategy to build that secret language strategy so that you create a brand that only speaks to your ideal customer. The result is you have a business where you're working only with your ideal customer. So your income is coming in, you could say, evenly across the board, but what you do know is you're not wasting your time. That is by far the most efficient and quickest way to a successful business that I know of.
It's great advice. And even more than that for you as the entrepreneur and business owner is it's more rewarding. You don't have as many of those days of going into the darkroom and leaning up against the wall and going, what am I doing? How did I miss the mark? And it's just so much more satisfying, isn't it, to be able to take care of customers who enthusiastically engage and you're a good fit for them and they're a good fit for you.
I mean, it's a flow you almost can't describe, and yet we all know it. I mean, every entrepreneur I talk to, I'll when we talk about the Pareto principle, I'll ask them, isn't it true that some of your most profitable transactions have been the easiest? Right. But then the reverse is true, too. Think about the customers that you've worked with where you've jumped through hoops, you've bent over backwards. They spent the least amount of money and drove you crazy.
Right.
Right. I don't know of an entrepreneur that hasn't seen that extreme. It's like, so what if we get rid of that? What if you only have those positive flow experiences? It absolutely, every day of your life is, you're happier, you're more enriched, you have time for your family, hopefully. I mean, everything's just running smoothly.
It makes so much sense, and many businesses don't do that. I love that you're bringing it up and highlighting like you are, because we've dealt with this struggle in our own business as we've grown, is wanting to take care of everybody, but you really need. It's not a fair service to them or to yourself or to your team. And that was an aha I had one day. It was, this isn't fair to my team. For me as an entrepreneur, as a leader, to keep taking on these types of customers who I think I'm servicing, but it's fatiguing and exhausting my own resources, which are also my employees, to where they're not going to enthusiastically be able to take care of those other 2 or the other 20%, right? And so I think we owe it to ourselves and to our team to make sure, and to those customers that might not be a good fit, to follow this principle. I think it's important.
Yeah, no, it's as I said earlier when I speaking about Bergdorf Goodman. Bergdorf Goodman is I don't know, it's probably a 13-story building right on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and tens of thousands of people walk by it every day and don't even know it's there, right? Because they're not for everybody,
right?
Right, and none of us are. It's just not possible. None of us are for anybody. So it's defining who you are for. This is actually how the book starts. And the exercises I go through to help people define who their ideal customer is. It actually starts with the question, whom are you for? Right? Who would love who you already are and what you do? It's important to ask those questions first before you then try to figure out, well, then who's my ideal customer, which I think a lot of businesses do it backwards. They first focus all their attention when defining their ideal customer on the customer. It's like, well, no, whom are you for first? Who would love your innate character? And one thing I always use as an example is I am an incredibly detailed, very particular person. I would drive a lot of people crazy, but I'm perfectly suited for ultimately the 2 major businesses that I've wound up developing. I am perfectly suited for an affluent clientele who's hiring a photographer because I'm detail oriented. They never have to worry about a thing. Yeah. I'm also perfectly suited for my coaching clients, the entrepreneurs that I work with, because I can hold them so well. Like I can hold their journey and their path, right? Because I can sense the details and move them forward. So that's an innate quality in me that I'm aware of, that I then allow that to be attractive just to my ideal customer. For somebody else, it would drive them crazy.
Right. That's great. I love that question. Hey, before we go, I want to talk just for one more minute about your book, Lingo, which I know that's kind of been our theme because that's why we have you on today. But I want to, what can the readers expect when they pick up this book and read it? What can they expect to get out of it?
It's always great to get the feedback from your editor. My editor said something the other day that I really loved, and I think it says a lot. The book I think it's going to be one of the more interesting business books in the way it's laid out. It is 3/4 very business strategy. The last section of the book is, one could say, easily self-help. I go into opening up their mind to a couple of concepts. I go into offering 3 mindsets that I think need to be looked at and 3 daily practices that one should enact. And it was so, it seemed like a disconnect from the business book because, in our world, we always have to choose. Is it a business book or is it self-help? And I come from a place of saying, it's not an either or. It's actually both. Right. It's one of a quote I live by is a quote by Jim Rohn. And Jim Rohn said that our level of success rarely exceeds our level of personal development. And I've always held that quote to be true. So the reason I developed Lingo as I did is that I wanted to give everybody the strategies, but then I wanted to also give them the tools to unblock what's in their way mentally and to give them practices to open up a positive flow so that they can get the results they want. So my editor made a comment the other day. She said, "Oh, I get it. You don't just want to change people's businesses. You want to change their life." And I said, exactly. This is a book I hope will not just give people the tools to improve their business, but also to give them the tools to change their life, which can come from having made to change their business or vice versa.
Thanks for sharing that. So how can we find your book, Jeffrey?
Well, the book's on Amazon, et cetera. But what I do have to offer your audience is what we've put together, a Lingo Media Kit, which they can get at jeffreyshaw.com/leadership. And because I'm a believer of giving people a taste of value first. Like I want, again, as you can tell, I'm the lingo guy. I'm all about do you get me? I want to make sure we get each other. Sure. So my preference, rather than just direct people to a website or even buying the book, my idea is put together this Lingo Media Kit, and in it you will find an infographic of the 5 steps of creating the secret language strategy, also a free chapter of the book, and also an audio version of a free chapter of the book. And the audio version is actually really cool. It's got sound effects, and it's got more content in the audio version than the actual written version. So my suggestion is go to jeffreyshaw.com/leadership. Download the Lingo Media Kit. You'll have a sense of who I am, and whatever else you want to find out on social media or my websites, you'll find it through there.
Awesome. Thank you. That's jeffreyshaw.com/leadership. That's a special free download for our listeners. And yes, you can do that, but I want to encourage you. I've done that. I've seen this material. It's great. Look, I'm going to encourage you to go to Amazon and pick up the book now as well. Jeffrey, we just started a book club. I think it's betterbookclub.com for our team. Where it's one of our education pieces that we do with our account managers, and they get points associated with it, and we kind of have our own agency book club. And I'm adding this book to our agency book club so that our account managers are reading and understand that lingo and that language as well, and for our sales team too. So our team will be reading this. I'm going to get a couple copies for our library there. So I look forward to our team reading it. Thank you for sharing it. I want to encourage our listeners to pick up that book, to visit Jeffrey and connect with him on social media. Jeffrey Shaw, his book Lingo, Discover Your Ideal Customer's Secret Language and Make Your Business Irresistible. Jeffrey, thanks for being our guest today.
Derek, thank you so much for having me. And gosh, that's really nice you're going to be sharing with your team. So thank you very much.
You bet, man. We'll talk soon, and we look forward to the next great things that we see you doing. I want to invite you to join me in supporting the American Diabetes Association. I've got the honor of being a Kiss a Pig candidate this year, which means I have the opportunity to help raise money for the American Diabetes Association locally. The ADA has been funding innovative research to combat diabetes since 1955. And in 2011, they funded more than $35.75 million a year in research at 139 research institutions across the country. The statistics, approximately 1.25 million American children and adults have type 1 diabetes. As many as 1 in 3 American adults will have diabetes in 2050 if present trends continue. I want to invite you to join me in supporting the American Diabetes Association. You can learn more at diabetes.org or stopdiabetes.com to see how you can get involved.
You've been listening to the Business Leadership Series, where we engage with leaders who are making an impact on their worlds and who want to share their knowledge and experience for your personal and professional growth. This interview was designed to inspire you to become the best leader you can be.